Before, left, before, left.
They turned out to be completely unreliable assholes.
Hello, Tim.
Oh, hello, Ryan.
And hello, Happy New Year, everyone out there listening. Welcome, welcome, welcome to episode 124 of Dismembering Horror, the podcast show where myself, Ryan McDuffie, and
Myself, Tim Aslin.
we dismember a horror film every week. In fact, we talk about what worked for us, what did not work for us, and anything else we found interesting or noteworthy about a horror film. We're on the quest for the sight unseen, for the sight less seen by us or many. In the case of this film, it was unseen by me, seen by you, Tim, some time ago. When did you see this last?
Oh, God. The last time I saw it was probably sometime within the last 10 years.
Cool. And what is it? In fact, today we are talking about Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962, submitted by our friend Ramsey. Thank you, Ramsey. And that isn't whatever happened to Baby Jane. It is whatever, the two words. In looking up the title for it in other movies, I noticed that there's a bunch of movies that are like whatever, one word, whatever happened to this, whatever happened to that. But this one, I'm guessing, is the OG one, is whatever happened to Baby Jane. So, and it is, as Tim, you pointed out, you want to make a point to say, I agree, directed by Robert Aldrich, screenplay by Lukas Heller, and based on the book of the same name by Henry Farrell. One of those.
You never know with that one.
Yeah. So what, do you remember the first time you saw this, Tim? What is your relationship with this movie?
I believe that the first time I saw this was when I was like, 12 or 13 or something like that. My parents, I guess it might have been on TV, but they were like, ooh, this is a classic. You should watch it with us.
Cool.
They might have rented it, but I doubt it. I feel like it was just on, whatever. I don't know what channel would have been playing it, but somebody was playing it, and we watched it. So I have, after that, I probably rewatched it in 2002 when I was on my, watch all of the, greatest movies of all time binge. I'm sure I watched it then. And then, yeah, I probably watched it sometime, I don't know. Probably in in this most recent decade for sure. Can't remember if I was in New York or here when I watched it, but yeah.
All right.
So I've seen it a few times.
There's your viewing history with it. I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions after we watch the trailer here, if you're ready for the trailer here.
I'm always ready. Except I don't have a place to put my coffee mug without it making noise. Come on. I need a coaster. I need a Spider-Man coaster for my Spider-Man mug.
You see how if you mention that, it defeats the purpose anyway of not wanting to do any interruption by putting it down. So you could just say, mug down. Anyway, great. All right, your mug's down. And when you lift it up, you'll be able to put it back down in the same spot.
Yep, you'll
all
never
set.
hear from it again.
All right, so here we go from 1962 with the question mark at the end. Whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Sister, sister, oh so fair, why is there blood all over your hair?
Whatever happened to Baby Jane? To seek the answer to that question, we will follow a man plotting a murder. Highly specialized work. But Robert Aldrich has considerable experience in such matters. He has a dozen successful pictures to his credit. His stars are Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. The scene, an Italianate villa in a once fashionable section of Los Angeles. Its halls, once crowded with the bright, the beautiful, and the celebrated, now echo only to hectic whispers, the insistent call of a buzzer better left unanswered. A telephone that has become an object of fear. A supper tray that will not be touched. A window barred against the world. A hammer. A mute scrawl crying for help. From these elements, director Aldrich has fashioned a motion picture with a curious title. Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Bette Davis is Jane Hudson. Joan Crawford is Blanche Hudson. But we must warn you, if you're long...
That was funny, very much like that Hitchcock Psycho trailer, right?
Like the what one?
Like the Hitchcock Psycho trailer.
Oh, yeah.
You know, just acknowledging the director and seeing footage of him and having it be some
Right.
sort of narration. Funny, old-fashioned like that. It's cool.
Yep.
Helped maybe segue the world and the audiences at the time from the 1950s to the new, seemingly tumultuous, different 1960s. We're just going to tell you everything
Yeah.
without telling you anything. But Tim, what I really wanted to know, I guess, when I asked you about your relationship to this film, so we got your lowdown when you may have seen it the previous 2 times, but can you use this to segue into, you know, how your current viewing was and what your rating is? So what was it like seeing it as a kid with your parents? What was it like revisiting when you were watching it as part of the best films list? And what was it like watching this last time?
Well, my vague memory of watching it as a kid was that, you know, it was not that exciting, and I kind of only remember like the murder of the maid. That was like the high point, and everything else I just don't really have a recollection of. Then when I rewatched it, I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it." As an adult or a young adult, I guess. And like I quite liked it that second time because at that point I had seen other films with Bette Davis. All About Eve, I think I watched right around then as well, and I'm sure a couple others. I'd never really seen. I probably still have never seen any Joan Crawford films. Well, that's not true. I think there's one with, oh God, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, maybe if she's in that. I can't remember who's in what, but you know, that's about it. Like one of her movies. So she's not like, she doesn't represent or like conjure up anything in particular for me. Although I think she's really good in this. And then this time, you know, I still think it's good, but I definitely have like critical, you know, points that I think are worth making. Especially in the context of like the other films we've watched and like other films of that era that we've watched. I think overall, I'd say this is all a performance-based, like, success. There is definitely filming stuff that I think is really cool, but I don't feel like that's what's, like, carrying the movie. It's all about the 2 performances for me. And, you know, I would say probably I'm still a rent for it. I don't feel like I want to own this. Sorry.
You don't have to apologize to anyone.
Sorry, all of all those hardcore Baby Jane fans.
Well, Tim, I feel like I may be amongst them now. I was quite taken with this movie, not knowing what to expect it or what it was going to be. It like just by the end of it, and then how I felt afterwards. It just conjured that bit of obsession that I get with just, you know, movies that that make an impact on me. So I just feel like I got to give it a buy it for that. This movie was so good. I thought it's amazing, and I was gonna watch. It was funny. It was one of those things where I'd always meant to see it, but then I stopped watching it, or I delayed in watching it because it was submitted a while ago. But now that it finally has, I'm so glad I finally seen it. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'll get to it more about why all that is. But I mean, in summary, of course, like you said, the acting, but I mean, I think it's just probably the original text it was based on, and then couple that with just a competent, experienced filmmaker, you know, making kind of whatever solid movies. That just was the perfect storm to, I don't know, get. It was very substantive for me. I'll be using that word a lot. How about today? Took me for a very, very fun ride in the way that the best movies do. So there you go. How about that summary then? Should we divulge to us what happened in this film, what it's about?
Yeah. Okay. It's about two sisters. And it's I think it's also important. It takes place in a specific era. So we start off in, I think, 1917 or 13, I forget which. And we see 17. And we see a young girl, probably 10-ish, who is a vaudeville performer. And, she's doing this sort of song and dance number with her father accompanying her on the piano, and it's to a big audience in a theater. And, they're one of the many revolving vaudeville acts of the time, pre-film. And, she's like somewhat successful, but you could tell that her dad is kind of a huckster, like he's stage dadding her, and like they're trying to make a buck off of her talent. And the older sister, so that's Jane, and the older sister, Blanche, is sort of this, I don't know, she seems kind of like a plain old person, girl, I don't know, sister. And the mom sort of says, hey, someday when you actually are successful, because you will be, just don't be too hard on your dad and your sister for all of this dragging you around the country and trying to make a buck family stuff. So then we jump to later, like, I don't know, 20 years later, and we don't see either of the sisters, but we get a nice little mini sort of, it's like a connecting exposition scene. And we learn that Blanche has become extremely famous in film, and that she's kind of contractually obligated the studio to keep her sister working in films as well, just as like a handout. So that's kind of interesting. And we get we'll talk about this in what works, but we get what I think is one of the cooler little foreshadowing nods or like clues in that scene. And then we get to the bulk. So that's all just exposition type shit. We get to the bulk of the story, which is 50 years later or whatever. The two sisters are they've been relegated to the mansion that they live in because Blanche's career was cut short by a car accident. And it is vaguely made to look as though Jane was the purpose that she ran over Blanche and crippled her.
And based on what we had seen of her as a child, a spoiled child, and what we'll come to see of her, it certainly it doesn't come as a surprise that she might be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a good, I would say 20 minutes of sort of setup scenes, which lead us really like hold our hand to be like, here's what you need to think of these people. In particular, that thing, the spoiled kid, and then seeing her as an adult and not being good. Like the film guys that are talking about them are like, she's horrible. Why do we keep giving her jobs? And they're like, well, because her sister said we have to. So we know that she's no longer talented or whatever, no longer relevant. So when we meet them as adults, they're both aged, and Blanche is in a wheelchair upstairs in this mansion, and Jane is completely out of her mind, which is fun to watch Bette Davis just go full force.
Yeah.
And she's kind of at first she's just kind of taunting Blanche a lot, and she's clearly an alcoholic. I mean, she's got like 50 empty bottles of liquor in the cabinet.
The way she's walking up the stairs at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Like she's
so
a mess. And there's like a half hour of the movie where it's just Jane being kind of a mess and bringing food on a silver platter up to Blanche, and then taking it away and bringing more food back or whatever. And that becomes kind of like one of the main tactics of psychological torture that she places on Blanche. And the reason she does that is because the real thing that's going on behind the scenes is that Blanche she desperately wants to get out of there. So she holds all the purse strings. So she's going to sell the house, put Jane in some sort of home or like hospital or whatever, and then like move on with her life. That's the impetus for all of Jane's like insanity. And it really just kind of spirals, like Jane knows what's up. Blanche wants to get out of there. Jane escalates. Blanche realizes she's in trouble and starts to try and find ways to get out of there. And it escalates all the way up to Jane, murdering the help, and really kind of just spiraling out of control psychologically. She hires a pianist so that she can revive her career as a singing vaudevillian 10-year-old. She dresses up the same way as she did back then. It's really nutso.
Yep.
And then, the law kind of catches up with her, and she tries to go on the run with Blanche, but ultimately gets what she wanted, which was a bunch of attention, and totally just like has a mental break. And like, that's kind of the end of the movie. Pretty much kills Blanche. It's left unclear. We don't know if she actually dies, but you can kind of presume. They end up on the beach, and Blanche really had a rough go at it.
Absolutely. I mean, left hanging essentially, her arms up, left, probably very little food or water, if any, at all.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah. All right, Tim. Well, there's plenty that worked for me here.
Definitely.
I'm sure you too. So should we get on with it?
We should.
All right, here we go. What worked?
What worked for you? What worked for you? What worked for you?
It worked like a charm, Smith.
What worked? What worked for you?
I guess we can always, start wide and then zoom in closer, but just to sort of talk through my experience more so watching this, I just wanted to say, like, from the opening moments, from the get-go, Tim, I'm like, oh man, this movie is doing it. This is a movie with some intention put behind it, some thought put behind it. Just from the opening moments, it's like, where I could see the screenplay, but in a good way, of like over black. A child cries kind of thing, is basically the intro. A child crying, and it's like, but to use that if you're using that as an intentional, deliberate opening for a movie, like that's just you can do so much with that. It's huge. It's huge. As I said, loaded topic, substantive. And then the thing, it's this, some random little girl outside of what we're going to jump into the theater to see Baby Jane. But the little girl, she's crying at a Jack in the Box, which is just like such just a clear, perfect, I mean, I was gonna say, yeah, it's a perfect metaphor, I guess, but it
really is.
But it's just so huge that it's hard to even put in those terms when it's like, yeah, it was afraid of something happening unexpected, which is like, the human condition.
Well,
it's like right there.
Yeah, it's so smart because it's that thing of, you know that something's going to happen. You know that there's this mystery in the box is going to come out. And what she's crying over, it seems more likely, is the anticipation of being scared or being startled or being messed with, right? Because a Jack in the Box is inherently sort of messing with your sense of anticipation and when are you going to get the scare?
It's sinister in that way. Like its intent is to startle you, which just sort of to a child especially is like, could just communicate there are things that don't care about your well-being on some level, that take joy in startling or scaring you. And then Tim, I don't know if maybe it was raining outside or is this stylistic and there's nothing else like it in the movie, but there's a tear coming from the Jack in the Box's eye. Like, holy crap, doing so much.
A little heavy-handed, but yeah, I dig it.
So good.
The whole movie is pretty in your face.
With Bette Davis as your lead, maybe we should just talk about the two of them, our leads here. Get that out of the way. How about?
Well, just to sort of one thing to tag on to what you're saying in the opening, the discomfort and like just for me at least, the inherent creepiness of the song and performance of the young Baby Jane, it really primes you up, I think. It's off and weird and uncomfortable. She's singing a song about writing a letter to her dad.
Daddy.
Yeah, and like she sealed it with kisses instead of a stamp, and like it's her dad's dead. He's in heaven. It's like what the fuck? Who decided to have a little girl singing that song and like doing a little dance to it? And then like her actual dad is accompanying her and like dances with her. It's just like, what is happening? Like it's fucking weird and uncomfortable and just like strange. And it's funny how like the audience is I guess, kind of like, I didn't really think about this in the context of the time, but people would come in and pay their nickel or whatever just to see that 1 5-minute performance, theoretically, right? They pack the theater, they see their thing, and they leave. Like it's a little like revolving door kind of thing. And then the next act is on. Mm-hmm. And it's something totally different. In this case, I think it was two brothers, like juggling brothers or something like that.
Yep.
And it's like, you just kind of get this whole overwhelming feeling of how weirdly and uncomfortably mechanical and like disconnected from like what a child experience should kind of be. Like there's nothing about it that feels warm or caring. It's all a facade.
Feels exploitive to the core.
Yeah, exactly. And then we see that Jane, is like, I want a fucking ice cream, man. Like I want to actually be a kid. Desperately just want to be a kid and not have to go like sign autographs or like go to bed early because I have to do another performance in the morning. And so you get a ton of important character like information in this fairly brief intro So I just think that like that's important. It sets the stage for the performances of the two leads. I mean, because it really it gives you a solid foundation to understand why they are the way they are.
Yeah, I mean, it was later in the film when I thought back to the opening and remembered the girl. I mean, yeah, that's totally true. How you put it, she just wants to be a normal girl getting her ice cream. But I think like the clear read to me on that scene, or the point of it, was she can get everything that she wants. She's, also spoiled in that sense.
Totally.
Where the dad will do whatever just to sort of keep up this appearance, make her happy, placate her. And that sort of sows the seeds for her Arrested Development in a way, Exactly.
I mean, it says everything you need to know, because instead of a kid who wants to be a kid being allowed to just be a kid, she's a kid who has learned that the only way to get what she wants is through manipulation. And that sort of thing of like, oh, I can get whatever I want if I just put up a fuss, and if I, whine about it or whatever enough, they'll just cave. And so both things are happening, right? It's like the worst version of not being able to be a kid, because you've kind of like dissected the behavior enough to manipulate and conditioned your parents into giving you whatever you want. It's the worst kind of, like, that's not how kids should act.
Well, and that's what this movie is really about, is a person who, it's the manipulate with a capital M right there. As you said, it's the perfect word for it. She's someone who will lie, do whatever she wants to sort of bend reality to sort of fit her own lies, or her idealization, or her denial, like whatever it is. Like, she's just one of those people whose fixation is, if I can get away with something, why wouldn't you do it to get what you want? Because you can, I'm going to do it.
And having parents who just give in is terribly unhealthy for a kid, right? Like a kid, every kid needs to have structure. It's the same. I mean, not to say that kids are like dogs, but they're kind of like dogs. Like if you let them if you let them loose and just to do their own thing and don't like give them rules and boundaries and shit, they'll just chew the couch up. And you'd be like, and then what? You punishing them for chewing the couch up? It's like, no, you gotta like give them safe, loving boundaries and understanding so they can develop and understand those in the future. She doesn't get any of that.
That's what it is more so, I think, is safe and loving intentions, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what I thought like sort of gets at was so scary about this kind of, she's kind of an antagonist and protagonist in this, Jane, right? Like where what's so scary is when you have someone like her is that sort of, self-serving master manipulator, will do and say anything, kind of, but how you were pointing as like an extenuation of that that spoiled child self, right? Getting no discipline.
Yeah.
We see, though, in her adult form, which is essentially still her child self, something like, what you think of when you say the word discipline, it's not going to do it. You feel like if you do something like that, it's just going to set her off more. And that's what's so terrifying. Just kind of just keep going down this thread that I was thinking of, in like these great movies, what they allow you to do. So that's so. I'm just thinking, like, what's so scary about that? It's almost like she's for her sister in this case, but we identify with her sister. It's like we're getting a call to action to be our better selves. How do we deal with Jane, someone who's so extroverted, controlling, will use physical force, what force is actually gonna, but any physical force back at her is just gonna make things worse too, because she's only gonna like then do bigger whatever physical force you used on her. So what's so scary, is how do you deal with that? And I don't know, I just thought it was as interesting as like how I looked at it. Tell me if you think there's any truth to this, is that to just deal with it at all, like to outwit it at all, requires like stepping into your better self, in a way, how I keep confusing their names, Jane and Blanche, I wanted to call her Joan. How Blanche has to start actually planning outwitting her, trying to throw the note out, whatever it is. But to actually help her and not go on the path of she just needs to be put away because she's crazy, that's, you could look at it as stepping not just into your better self, but like a best self maybe. How do you all of a sudden empathize or give what that person needs that seems just so far gone by any current measures of society as far as, approaches to things like this?
Yeah. I think, what is probably the most compelling aspect of this movie and the story is how deeply embedded the psychology is to all of their behavior and like just their characters. Because like at the end of the day, the movie is about exploitation, right? If Jane is the product from all angles of exploitation. And the genius of the movie is that they make it out to seem like she's only the victim of one type of exploitation, and that she's crazy, and her behavior now is just her being a jealous, crazy, insane person. But what we find out in the end is that she's kind of the victim of the entire story. She was exploited by her family. She was then exploited by her sister to kind of be dragged along in a career that she was not suited for. And then she's again exploited by her sister by being the scapegoat for the accident. Like, and being lied to because of her drinking problem. She, could be manipulated by Blanche's that she was the culprit of Blanche's accident. And that's a level of exploitation. How many years has it been since then, right? Like, Blanche has carried around this lie that think how messed up that is. You tried to kill your sister because you're an asshole. And you crash the car and break your own back in the process of it. And then because you know that your sister is troubled and is probably blackout drunk in the moment, you 2 days later say, hey, sorry, but you were so drunk, you ran me over and broke my back. That is the most insidious, messed up thing you can do. And then you carry on that lie for the next 40 years. That's insanely unacceptable. And that's Blanche. Blanche did that. She is just it's revenge for what? Something that Jane didn't deserve in the first place, right? Like, Jane didn't ask to be a vaudeville, stage kid. Her dad made her do that. So, when you look at it, when you realize at the end, I think that's a tragedy of the movie and why it's so good, is that we, the audience, have been led to believe this totally other thing. That Jane is the product of her own shittiness. That she's a brat, and that she's just a whiny, crazy, spoiled kid who never grew up. It's like everybody else created the situation for her to be that way. And sympathizing with Blanche the whole movie is so smart, right? Like that misdirect is amazing because, you know, it really does make us think what an awful person Jane is. It's great. But like, she's not the problem. I mean, she does awful things, but it's just act out behavior, right? It's childlike behavior. And it's really sad to me because it's, man, like you're saying, if Blanche could have just like, you know, exhibited a little bit of a higher self and just copped to it or like sought out help for Jane in a compassionate way, not a let's get her out of my life way.
But look at like the track that they went on. You can understand how she got there because I think, you know, her intentions behind keeping her on contract while she went on to be successful, like, are good intentions. But it's kind of
you're right.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Of like, maybe though the solution isn't in making her, you know, that's reinforcing something negative instead of. But unfortunately, it's also just could be like, oh, you're just getting her work. So how is that a bad thing?
Yeah. Well, so it brings me. I think this is a good place to just stick in this great scene, which seems a little bit just as like a passing scene of exposition, but it's the two studio execs. They've just watched Jane acting in one of these films that Blanche has kind of like, you know, made them make for her or made them put her in. And they're like, man, she's just bad. Like, she's just not good. Why do we keep having to do this? And as they talk about the situation, they come up on a giant, I think it's it's one of these big 1930s like convertibles, huge car. I think this car actually is at the Peterson Museum of Automotive Museum. They have a bunch of picture cars there, and I'm pretty sure this is one of them. It's huge. I mean, the thing is a goddamn tank. And it's super elaborate. And they walk up, and this line is just so perfect for foreshadowing because it says everything you need to know in a veiled way. They walk up to this car. They've just finished talking about why this situation is screwed up. And they turn to the car, and the guy goes, he's like, who would even want a monster like this about the car? And really what he's, you know, it's a metaphor, right? Like they pan over and you see Blanche's name on a placard that it's like, this is her parking spot. This is her car. And, you know, it's really this veiled metaphor of like, they tell us Blanche is the monster in that moment. Mm-hmm. And until you watch it a second time, you don't realize what they're saying, but like, it's right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
You know, and like little things like that. I think that to me, these are the things that I complain about a lot, where we watch movies when these things don't exist. Foreshadowing, nuance, metaphor, you know, things that tie together in a fun and, you know, compelling, intellectually intelligent way. The girding or undergirding of the story and the characters and what motivates them and where we're going and all those things, like, that's good storytelling to me. And when it's not there, that's when I get wound up because I'm like, just come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so that's my, I don't know, was that a rant?
I don't think so.
It felt like I was talking forever.
I guess I look at rants, a Tim rant, as meaning your voice has to raise a few decibels.
Yeah.
That's at least how I define
fair.
it. Okay, what else we got going on here? How about just some of the more like horror-esque things in it that like really got... It's so funny, Tim. I was thinking like, we watch, what's that? I don't know why I'm picking on this one. This is just the one that came to mind when I was thinking on it. But it was like the Netflix one that The Lodgers, was it? Or the Inn?
Lodgers.
Where the little the little door to the ghost ocean below the lake below the house or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking of that being like, yeah, so that had creepy, eerie imagery, I guess, but it's not like anything ever scared me in it or disturbed me or bothered me or affected me or like really made me feel or whatever. It was pretty middling or whatever. But then this one, it was just so incredible, like how horrified it actually made me feel in some of those moments. I mean, the one, of course, that most got to me, we have Jane serves Blanche her dead pet bird on her plate, and then if that's not enough, maniacally laughs about it as if like that, just something about doubling down on that's her reality, that this is something that you just kind of when you just really break down what's going on, it's horrific, it's horrible, it's like a distillation of all the sort of horrible neglect that that she received as a kid, but just that distilled to just this pure, just this act of evil. It's like pure evil, man. It really got to me.
There's so much to it. This is kind of again why I think this is so brilliant. The construction of these things, the metaphor that's underneath them are so incredibly spot on. So Blanche has a bird, a songbird, I believe, that she keeps in a cage.
That's
right?
why I made the comparison to that movie, is because the bird in the cage, right?
But that's your metaphor, right? Like, we make the connection, at least on some level, that like, that this is we see Blanche, she's in a wheelchair, she's in the upstairs, she can't really go anywhere. We initially think to ourselves, oh, Blanche is, she has a bird in a cage because she's a bird in a cage, right? Like she was this successful person and now she's relegated to this, prison that she's in.
The upstairs of a house, not even the whole house.
Right.
You can't get downstairs.
And so we sympathize from that angle. But what the metaphor, and so then Jane, of course, comes in with the empty cage and she very flippantly is like, well, your bird got out. I was trying to do something nice and clean its cage, but it got out and it flew away. And it's all very like, it's just shitty.
Elvira, the housekeeper, she knows she's lying too. I love Elvira for that.
Oh yeah, it's so. I mean, even the way she's doing it, it's a put on, right? It's an act, and she knows it, right? Like Jane knows she's just acting out and being like, "Whoops."
She's up to
rolls
something.
Her eyes. I didn't mean to do it, and it's like, oh God, you're the worst. You did, and so. But what we realize is that if you scratch the surface a little bit deeper, Jane is the bird in the cage, right? That Blanche was holding captive by her own manipulation by telling her that she was the one that crippled Blanche.
So it's Blanche saying, or it's Joan saying, hey, Blanche, you've turned me into this dead bird is me.
Yeah. And I'm going to feed it to you.
God damn.
You know what I mean? Like that's...
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting at is how deeply smart and nuanced Jane's character motivations are. In everything she does, there's like this sort of deeper meaning that points to the lie that she's been told.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stuff is just amazing to me, right? The second time she does it, so like, and just on the surface, what you're saying, I totally agree. The idea of being served your pet bird in your dinner is so messed up, like so messed up,
and then laughing about it,
being like, yeah, like that's so twisted, and then she uses that to mess with Blanche further because she serves her food and she's like, don't let your lunch get cold.
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
it's like, hint, hint, there might be something under there. And then there isn't, right? So she keeps doing it. And then she does it again by putting a rat under in the plate. But before she says, she's like, I would never put anything under there. She had just eaten some of the previous meal that was not tainted in front of Blanche. And then she gives her a new meal and she's like, don't worry, I didn't put anything under there. I would never do anything like that. Oh, by the way, we have rats in the cellar. And then, of course, Blanche is like, well, fuck. Now I don't want to look under there. And we all know that there's going to be a rat under there. Blanche knows there's going to be a rat under there.
Yeah.
And there's a rat under there.
And then,
you know?
and then Joan...
And
yeah.
Jane's she's over there laughing her ass off. But even again, the rat thing, you know, it feels like, I don't know, it also feels poignant to me. I don't know exactly what the metaphor would be, but like, you know, she's a rat, she's a liar. She's, you know, Blanche, I mean. So like, it's almost like Jane knows but doesn't know. And I think that carrying through and having her be in this arrested development state and this delusional state of like what's real and where she is in her life.
No, it's that she's the victim. That's what she's at least aware of. It's not so much a knowing of a specific thing of being betrayed. It's her knowing, you could say deep down, I am a victim too. And it's like, what do they say? Anything like this is a call for help. You know?
Exactly. Man, it's just so good. And then this sort of B story thing with the pianist who like
wait,
but
I want to get to the pianist. Hold on, the pianist thought. So I want to mention I love the line too when she goes, well, you're not getting your breakfast because you didn't eat your din-din. And just a little more surrounding that you know, her being her surrogate I don't know, not like caretaker, I guess.
Yeah.
That I think there's just a lot to it in the way that Jane is in that treating her and talking to her like a child. That's just quadrupling down on the idea of like, your feelings don't matter so much that I can talk down to you as if you were not even, it goes beyond just a child, but like a plaything is what it makes you feel like. It totally robs you of any sort of worth. Just like in dialogue like that, and let alone, you know, what she's feeding him.
It's just so well constructed because we cannot help but sympathize with Blanche. She's being messed with. She's in a wheelchair. She's like, all these things are, it's just in the biggest, boldest letters of like, sympathize for this one. She's got giant eyes, you know, like sad giant eyes. And she's like, her life seems so miserable and she's got this woman messing with her.
Yep.
And yet, what we should be doing is sympathizing with Jane, right? And not to say we shouldn't sympathize with Blanche, like her situation does suck, but it is of her own making.
Well, I mean, what this is all getting at too, and you know, this is sort of just a recurring thing, an inherent thing in all the horror movies we talk about. It's sort of once you start digging, or you know, tearing it apart, whatever, breaking it apart this way, it's
dismembering it.
Yeah, dismembering it exactly. Just like we did with Psycho, you can't pinpoint the trauma. You can't pinpoint the blame on any one person at a certain point. You know,
totally. Yeah, you're right. It is very Hitchcockian feeling.
Yeah, which you can see
a lot.
You can see as far as, you know, passing on trauma between generations. And you wanted to say something on Edwin, which I did too. But what were you going to say on Edwin the pianist? Because he's just great, introduced as another aspect of the theme or whatever. But yeah.
He's a foil for Jane, right? Like. It is funny too how they use him and his mom as sort of further information characters, right? Like the mom knows the history of Jane and like gives this little oration on it.
Yeah.
but like he's a foil for her, right? He's kind of like the upside down version of her, kind of. For example, he's a man child, right? Like he still lives with his mom. His mom is kind of overbearing, but she's doing it in the opposite way as the stage dad did, right? A stage dad is overbearing and trying to like make a buck off of the talent of their kid. Whereas Edwin's mom is insisting that the art form is not valid and that he needs to make a buck off of being having a real job. So he can, but the goal is the same for both parents, right? Provide for me, which is a horrible, it's just horrible. Stop asking your kids to provide for you, you jerks. And so it creates this, I don't know how to even describe it. The characters, they like Edwin and Jane, they've developed into this weird adult child thing.
Yeah. Well,
and yeah, I just think that this guy, the actor has an interesting name, and now I can't remember what it is.
Victor Buono.
Yeah. This is his first role. Like I remember in the opening credits, it says, and introducing.
He went on to be like one of the villains in the 60s Batman TV shows. Yeah.
Sweet. So it's just a really smart thing to then have these two man children or adult children interacting with each other. And it's freaky. That whole sequence when they meet, all of their interactions feel very strange to me. Like just awesome in the most awesome way.
Right. There's
like cringy and uncomfortable.
Because he's humoring her, yet from his own self-serving, I have to lie to get a job kind of way. Yeah, it's just like...
He's manipulating her.
Right. And I wondered if a way to put it was that he, in a way, is doing... It's like he's same in those ways, but is like same coin, different side in a way, where he's... I mean, you could, compare his relationship with his mother, is this sort of same sort of messed up setup or whatever, that all these people have. But it's that he is faking being someone else, like putting on the accent and just lying about his history, whatever it takes to get the job. And yet she is fixated on being herself, but like her kid's self. It's just there's a weird, cool stuff going on in there.
There's
and it's
a weird tension between them, which I love, but I'm like,
well, it's because it's so clear that she's basically, I don't know what the actual proper terms are, but it's like where she's his sugar mama, basically, is the setup, where it's like she's putting him on the payroll.
Right. But she's lying because she doesn't have money. You know what I mean? So there's this further sort of like they're both just manipulating each other and neither can really deliver. But I think what ends up happening, or the effect that has, is that you see these two people jockeying for something that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then what the result is, we just see them having this rapport that's dancing around jockeying for something that doesn't exist. And so they're really just like coexisting in the room together in like this weird floaty like just uncomfortable way, because neither of them have any footing.
Yeah,
it's freaky and very cool. And then I like that he kind of falls apart.
Oh, when he shows up drunk at the end, it's so good.
Yeah, but like the reason, at least the surface reason it seems that he falls apart, is that his mom tells him the truth about who Jane and Blanche are. And he gets all wound up about it, and he has to go find out whether or not Blanche is being held captive there. And he does. He sees her, right? Like, and he runs out and he gets drunk.
Or he's already drunk. Yeah.
He's already drunk. Like, so he's having a night.
Yeah.
Where he's like, I don't want to accept. It's actually a really cool version of what Jane is experiencing, right? Like, I don't want to accept reality, so let me just go get drunk all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want to accept this truth that he's been told, and so he goes and gets drunk, but he is compelled to go show up at the doorstep and be like, wait, no, I need to know. Jane is not. She's full in on, I'm just going to avoid and deny and drink.
Yep.
And just it's just such good character writing. Everything's serving the plot. Everything's serving the character motivation. It's fucking great.
Well, it was a scene involving Jane and Edwin that was hands down my favorite scene. Yeah. Which I'm realizing now, it's just another one that happens to involve dancing as far as my favorite scenes and musical numbers here.
Yeah.
But Tim, my God, when she gets him to play the old song, she dresses up, and it's like that one shot from like low down, and she's dancing in front of those lights that are basically acting as those sort of like ground stage lights.
Yeah.
And she's performing her dance. It was just one of those like, this is pure cinema. I don't know how to put it other than that phrase. Like it's just so good.
Truly incredible cinema.
Yeah, it was just the best of the best right there. And that's when the movie, like, oh man, just knocked my socks off.
This is why, I mean, it's sort of schadenfreude, I guess. This is why I like watching the American Idol auditions. Because they are this, a lot of them. And there's something uncomfortable and thrilling and sad about watching somebody who's kind of out of touch give it their all and still kind of be a mess. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know why I like it, but maybe I'm an asshole. I am an asshole. But there's just something about it that's so like, it's the train wreck, right? Like, can't look away from the train wreck.
I don't know, man. I think it's that we haven't, as a society, acknowledged that there can still be something just beautiful in watching someone put on a song and dance and perform their heart out. Like that, that is,
no, you're right.
Just because it's beyond this sort of like societally deemed, and you know, it's not just society, because it does come from, oh, that voice sounds good. That person looks good or makes me feel a certain way. But it doesn't make like someone's, I don't know. And that's just that paradox within there. But then human worth is all equal, yet that person made me feel better than this other person. So that's just where it gets into that awkward, I think, territory where, you know, can only, it's easier just put it as satire. But I think it's like when someone puts on a performance and is singing genuinely, like that just is, there's nothing, you know, more beautiful in that sense if you just look at it that way. And like, can't you just get on board with that? It's why, like, never mind, but you get the point.
I do, and I think that you're making an important point to what the content of this movie has, right? Like what it is. That all is kind of its own, I don't know, what's the word? Its own layer, I guess, of what is being said in this movie, right? The industry chose Blanche. And for whatever reason, right? Like Jane had a career to begin with. Like Jane was a commodity. She was a brand. She's all these things that we attach labels to a human being and turn them into a product.
Mm-hmm. The doll.
And yet, she's the doll. And yet it didn't work, right? Like the doll, you know, went out of favor. And the other doll came into favor, and that was Blanche. And so I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head with this idea. It's underneath all of that, right? Can we just watch this human being like shine her own light, regardless of what we deem as good or bad? It's just her own light.
It's
It's
also
the shade of whatever color of the spectrum that she is.
right, and it's just that it's also just the pretense behind it. Oh, she once was, she's upset about once being loved and not anymore, and being famous and no one knows her name anymore. Like, that's something that's just so hard to separate from just rather than just observing the performance in of itself.
Yeah, there's this whole kind of subtext about the industry and how it just kind of chews up and spits out people like they are, a sandwich, it's they're the soup du jour or whatever, you know what I mean? And they just like move on to the next. And even with Blanche, right? Like, of her own doing, but like she was the soup of the day for a time, and then she self-destructed. And now we're spending, the movie with these two people who the industry would just call has-beens.
Right.
And then they exploit Blanche, right? The industry needs a buck. And so they say, well, who do we have in the catalog that we can show a bunch of movies on TV and get some viewership, right? Like, even that has this weird, gross, insidious vibe to it, because she ain't getting paid for that.
Mm-hmm. Nor is she getting her fan letters, it turns out.
Well, right, exactly. So you have, it's just so cool that you've got from all these different angles, these versions of exploitation and just the grossness that revolves around how we view what's popular and talent, and like how quick we are to move on from a thing.
But the
instant
positive
gratification or something.
The positive inverse of all that is like when we see someone get their Lifetime Achievement Award and like get their standing ovation or whatever at the Oscars. It's interesting,
Yeah. And that's the recognition part that that Jane is seeking and gets in the end, just through the worst methods.
It's so right. It's so sad. It is sad when we see her like just. It's like the peaked too early kind of thing, and sort of again this view of like she remembers as a kid just the way she'd make other kids and audiences light up, and she just wishes like you see and you feel that like when she says to the bank teller whoever like, oh, I was baby Jane, and they're just like, oh, who the hell was that? But it's like as if she just wants to just like pull out that positive feeling that she was giving those other people and just be like, here, don't you see it? Remember this, and just make them light up. But it's like, it's not that easy. And it gets at the whole life is temporary and fleeting, baby kind of thing. And
and you better learn to adapt and change with the times or whatever.
Oh yeah, it just reminds me of kind of whatever every generation goes through, and we're probably going through it, with our favorite actors and stuff now, where it's like it's going to be a younger generation. Oh, this show, this actor, they were the best. This was the best. Like we remember our parents and grandparents doing, and then the generation below is just kind of like, what? We're just kind of or you just seeing our favorite actors now and like. Thinking of them as their, in their quote unquote prime movie star selves. Dude, I remember when Jim Carrey was Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, whatever it is.
I mean, think about this, like just from my end, the reason I got into film was because of two actors that I admired that were like my quote unquote sort of heroes that I was like, I want to be like them. I want to make movies like that. Mel Gibson and Tom Cruise. Can you imagine, like, in 20 years, it's my kid being like, who were your favorite actors growing up? And I say them too? They'd be like, ooh, Dad, what was going on with you?
When you were like, telling me...
I have to explain to them that they were not, who we know them as now. Like, they were very different, or appeared to be very different people when they were young.
Yep. They're who we wanted to see, of course. But that's not invalid,
Right.
As far as being inspired by what you see. Isn't that what movie stars are, in a way?
It's crazy. So, yeah, I love that this movie gets you, the juices of all of that stuff flowing and just makes you kind of want to take a bath in it.
I mentioned, the doll. That's just another great motif throughout this of just like sort of exactly like everything we've been saying. Like the doll is the sort of, at one point it's kind of, oh, let me, if a kid buys that doll for $325 after seeing Baby Jane, then they bring that piece of joy home or whatever. But then as the decades go on, it becomes this like, just this forgotten thing. And for Jane, it's just like this mannequin of, this was my smaller, younger self, that then she looks in the mirrors and sees that she's far from being anymore and just breaks down.
That lighting change is one of the most amazing moments. Mm-hmm. She's kind of contrasty lit. She's lit, but there's a lot of contrast on her face when she's initially, I can't remember, is she singing in that moment? Either way, but then she steps underneath a top-down light, and it really, like, all the shadows go away. It's like just as bright as you could get on her face, and she sees that version of her face in the mirror and has a complete meltdown. And the way that is shot, there's a lot of obvious, it's black and white. There's some incredible filmmaking techniques and just in shadow and such.
Oh yeah,
but man,
the last
that
scene,
one blew me away.
the last scene in the bedroom, just lighting wise, really struck a chord with me, where it's just like bathed in these gorgeous deep shadows for their little final confrontation. They have they use the practical light of on the bedstand, and the angle that they shoot her face at is sort of 3/4, and what it ends up doing is like a lot of one half of her face is just completely in darkness, but because they're at an angle that practical light, the lamp on the bedside table, is catching the cornea of her eye that's in darkness, and it's literally like glowing in this, shadow. Just the rim of her eye and her pupil are sort of brightly lit up. It's so disturbing looking. Right? Yeah. It looks like this weird negative space with an eyeball just sort of floating. It's so freaky, and she's being very freaky. It's fucking great. Another one of my favorite pieces of just kind of the filmmaking combined with the context and, of the story was the overhead shot of on her of Blanche on her wheelchair, where just the whole time in the movie it was pretty cathartic in a way, where this whole time we're feeling like the sort of trappedness of being upstairs and not being able to get down the stairs. There's the moments where she like looks, kind of scopes it out, and we know she wants to make it down, but it's just pretty impossible or difficult. So then to also to have we're already getting this sense of trappedness and just not being able to escape. And then that shot just encapsulated it perfectly. From above, she's just in this little area of house in her room, and just the wheelchair spinning around, can't go anywhere. It was just so perfect. Using the fact that she's in a wheelchair, you couldn't really do that if she was mobile.
It is. I mean, that's a very famous moment too. Like, I think people, even if you haven't seen this movie, you've seen either that referenced or like parodied.
Yeah.
Because I like that shot came out, I was like, oh right, this thing. I've seen this a bunch of times. It just has that feel.
The one, shout out, just, acknowledge it. The moment that was the famous moment that I somehow knew through reference or osmosis. And like, if you type the movie on YouTube, it comes up as the first clip. It's not that spinning wheelchair, but it's the quote. And or it's looked at, this is the scene, even though there's tons of other lines when you're watching it in the context of the movie, it doesn't really seem.
Oh, wait, let me guess. I bet I know. Is it, but you are, Blanche. You are in that chair.
Yeah. It's amazing. So good. It's just to, say up front now, how great they both are in this, but how it really is the tour de force for Bette Davis and that kind of acting. Very much, like I've mentioned, our other favorite, like, bringing it to 110% actors that we've mentioned. She's totally one of those. It is so much fun and that moment, that line encapsulates that. Like, I guess I get why that's so famous and it is so satisfying.
I will say, and like, I know there's all sorts of stuff out there about the relationship that Bette Davis and Joan Crawford had and their experience making this. I think they made another film together as well. Like, and there's all sorts of like, whatever, people conjecture about whether they liked each other or not, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff exists. But one thing is for certain, Blanche, well, they are so perfect for each other. And like the performances, I know Bette Davis got a lot. Well, she was nominated and Joan Crawford was not for this movie. And take that for what it's worth. You cannot. Bette Davis's performance is so fucking incredible and so like crazy and nuanced and sad. It's got a million different components going on. And I think that's really like what the biggest takeaway for me in terms of praising her performance is how diverse the aspects of her performance are, and yet they all are cohesive in this one character. And it's amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, I think that Joan Crawford's performance is so compelling because we feel so much sympathy for her. Like, her panic and she doesn't have a lot of lines or anything. She spends a lot of the time just kind of being scared. But man, she feels super grounded. I feel so bad for her.
Oh my God.
And even when she finally is able to tell Jane the truth, I feel bad for fucking Blanche in that moment, which is so messed up, but it just goes to show like how well she did to gain our sympathy in her performance. I mean, Joan Crawford did, so that Blanche doesn't, even though she is kind of the actual monster of the movie, you still just feel for her. And I think that's really amazing and worth noting, I guess.
I think it highlights that in this movie, I heard like the word camp thrown along, around describing it, or that Bette Davis's performance is this crazy over the top thing. But I think the way Joan Crawford is in it, it's like you could say, oh, it's a more understated performance, and it is, but it's that it's a more understated character, and like we don't feel any less weight from her, like rather, like when she's dying at the end, she doesn't have to be like, oh, I can't, you haven't been feeding me, I'm starving. We just like feel her withering away, from her performance, and it's incredible. And so much like, I think she is just portraying a character or a person who is just, that is how they are. You say this exact same thing about Baby Jane. That's who she is. That's a kind of, there are people like that. It's not that it is some like over the top performance. It's perfectly cast, perfectly done, but it's not, neither are any kind of, extreme, outside of the bounds kinds of, choices of filmmaking.
No, I think I maybe should change my vote. I hadn't drank any coffee when I said that I was a rent.
It's giving you enough to chew on now.
Yeah. I should be a buy. Maybe I will. I'm going to officially make myself a buy.
Cool. You're too distracted by where to put your mug down. Everything was wrong.
That's right. I slept horribly last night. Anyway, yeah. No, it's so good. It from so many different angles.
We didn't even really touch much about Elvira.
I know.
Who's like, she's so important for this movie as almost being kind of a marker of sanity for the audience of just like, she's she's not just like no BS, but she holds that and defends that and is kind of like our trooper, our soldier for all that. Like the way she stands up to those baby Jane at the end, and then it just made it all that much more horrible and horrifying than when she gets killed in the moment by the hammer by her. But she's just great, and I think super important for the film, what she represents.
I do too. I absolutely love that sequence because her coming back and being like, she placates Jane in just the right way, but lies to her face, right? She kind of plays Jane's game back on her and pretends to be naive and pretends that she left the keys at home. Oh, no, I don't have the keys. Oh, let me go stand at this bus stop and wait for you to drive by and then piece the fuck back to the house. Like,
right.
It's so good.
It's because it's on that level that Jane is doing it. So it's like, you know, if she can't call her out on doing anything wrong when she's just meeting her at her own game.
Yep. Yeah, I love it. And it is heartbreaking to see her die and then just get tossed on the side of the road and left, you know. I love the newspaper headline. It doesn't mention her name. She's just referred to as the Hudson's maid. And she's found dead on the side of the road in Ventura.
Right.
I mean, it is, and I also like that the only other person of color in this movie is the one who comments on that headline. He sees the newspaper and he's kind of like, "Damn, that's a horrible way to go."
Yeah.
You know, and like, not that this film has anything to do with representation or any commentary on it whatsoever, but it's just, I don't know, there's something so endearing about Elvira's character and I guess it's what you're saying, she's us, you know, she's our touchstone into this world, like she knows what the hell's going on.
Right. She feels like our strength of just being willing to stand up to this crazy woman.
Yeah.
Call her out for her BS for what it is.
Yeah. And I think that's, you know, again, it's really well constructed to take that character and have them be the one death in the movie, the one murder. Mm-hmm. It's tragic.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of part of my big broad thing is that, like, to me this movie does not feel like a horror film so much as a tragedy. It's psychological, you know, thrilling and all of that, and so, like, sure, but the tragic aspect of it is what I'm always left with.
Right.
All around, it's just so sad.
Well, I wanted to mention too a suspense moment that probably got to me more than any other, like, I can't think of another film where it just made me feel this, like, into it and intense, was just when Blanche, is trying to get the letter to the neighbor. And
I love it.
And it's like she writes in it, it's so amazing, she writes in it like, "Do not let my sister Jane see the contents of this note." So it's just like, we're so scared of Jane at this point, just like she's so unhinged, you know? And so, like, just that moment where who's the letter gonna end up with, you know, when it's laying on the ground. And then when Jane does take it, it's just like, I was just freaking out. I was like, oh my God, she's going to read it. She's going to go even more crazy. It just felt like the repercussions of that were so huge and terrifying. I was just so into it.
I feel like this scene or sequence, I guess, is sort of, to me, this is the masterclass in building suspense. Hitchcock obviously is really good at this as well. But, you know, establishing a goal, establishing a timeline, and then constricting the timeline and making it all, like, come to a head at one moment. Like, and like, the way that this sequence in particular, but in general, the way that those types of sequences are made most compelling is to shrink the ticking time bomb, like the time frame that a thing needs to happen in, while expanding the actual time that it takes for the scene to unfold. And this does it so, so well, right? She's in a hurry, but she types the thing out, but then she's like, shit, I don't have time. I got to handwrite some more stuff. But then it's like, you're handwriting a whole message. Like, come on, just get to it, right? So we're already like pressed for time. And that time, that extra time costs her because Jane comes home right as she's throwing the letter out the window, right? And then we have this drawn out sort of, it's probably only a minute long or something like that, but that minute just goes on and on because the paper just sits there in between them. They have a conversation. We really don't know if Jane's going to pick it up. Blanche is watching from the window but has to like scoot back and not be seen. Like all of those little details expand the time that something very brief is happening within. And it just makes our heart rate go up.
It did. That's all I was getting at. I was so into it.
It's so well constructed and executed. I mean, love that stuff. I really wish, that kind of detailed, execution of scenes like that. I don't feel like we see that much anymore.
Though I haven't seen his latest opus. I think Christopher Nolan does that really well. Like that's all Dunkirk was just these.
That's true. Yeah.
I love Dunkirk for that.
Yeah.
I loved him. I thought it was so smart if you kind of look at it as, I put it as a horror movie in a horror sense of like feeling, almost like The Shining. We just had this feeling the whole time that it was going to build to some sort of outburst on Jane's part that was going to be violence. And so I'm thinking even before, I hit play on the movie, right? That's where it was going to go. So as far as, having the perceived reality be that Jane did hit Blanche with the car, like that I think was so smart to do up front, because then it sort of gets us to buy into that possibility of how unhinged she might get, without having to necessarily hold our hand all the way over again. It holds our hands, and how do we then repeat that kind of outburst? But then I thought was so smart just on top of that, having, her perceived kind of violent outburst at the beginning. Then, of course, you have the build with the animals and whatnot. But I kept thinking like, well, where's this going to... I kept thinking it was going to go to, she kills Blanche somehow. It's going to be some kind of horrible thing like that. And she does. She leaves her to she torches her and gives her a slow death, basically. But as far as that outburst of violence I knew was going to happen, it was so smart to use that on Elvira instead, because you still have that moment of like you're waiting for of this violent outburst towards another human. But then it got that out of the way in a sense where I was like, well, where is this ending gonna go all of a sudden? And just where it did go, I just thought it was incredible. Like the whole ending was so good. Like first of all, it's like this whole sort of girthy set piece of at the beach. First of all, it's not just like a little snapshot of a scene, but then it's just everything that's going on in it, from like the sort of, you're at a beach after being in this house this whole movie. It's the beach that they played at when they were kids. It's like surrounded by people, like even though they're in the news, and like the cops are slowly catching on to it. And then of course she gets her crowd around her, and it's just like she's trying to play ball with the other kids there as if she's a little kid. It's
so good.
Incredible, right?
And all leading up to Blanche telling her the truth.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't know if you noticed this, and I'm not sure. I'm going to just assume that this was intentional. The makeup that, they added a bunch of aging makeup to both of them for this film, right? Like they don't look like they do in this, in actuality. Well, they're dead now, so who knows what they look like. But the aging makeup that they put on them in that moment when they're on the beach together in sunlight is really thick, and really both of them look like shit, right? You can tell the weight of the movie has really hit them at this point.
Yeah.
And then we have our moment of revelation, right? Blanche tells Jane the truth. Then Jane gets up and goes and says, I'm going to go get some ice cream. In the ice cream scene, when she's asking for it, she has almost none of that prosthetic aging makeup on. She's clean-faced. It looks just like that's just Bette Davis with like some eyeliner on. And my take on it, if it's true that they really just stripped her of that makeup purposefully, my take is that like she's become kind of her childlike self again.
I mean, that's what the whole scene is. I didn't even mention
exactly.
it in that terms.
So,
yeah.
So because that's what the scene is, I think they intentionally pulled that makeup off of her to make her look more revived and youthful.
Well, it's that her character wouldn't care about putting on makeup like that, maybe, at that point. If she's her kid self.
The sort of the prosthetic aging stuff that they had put around her eyes, that's gone when she's picking up the ice cream.
I didn't know if that was prosthetics or not. Are you sure about that?
It's just like, it's not prosthetics, I think, but it's they've caked on a bunch of extra like fake wrinkles on her eyes. On both of them. They had this sort of it's like latex stuff that they had like put on around their eyes.
Okay.
And I think that the filmmakers said, hey, we need to see her in this moment actually looking more youthful, because she's really she's gotten the information and she's doubled down on her denial.
Mm-hmm. Well,
she's really reverted into, now she's just the kid.
She already has, though, just with them going to the beach, because that reveal doesn't happen till partway through.
But that's my point, is that I think that was the filmmakers' way to further that spiral into, childlikeness.
Mm-hmm.
By like having visually that stripped away from her, even, it's sort of unnatural, right? Like you wouldn't, but it's sort of like the weight is lifted, right? The age is lifted from her in this weird sort of metaphorical and literal way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd have to look it up and see if there's anybody makes this comment as well, or if it was just a matter of practicality on the set. You know what I mean? Like, it could have been that too, but it works regardless. It worked because it made me go, "Oh man, that's cool."
It's funny because like my read on it before, kind of, I thought it was supposed to be like kind of intentionally unclear if Blanche was lying to Jane about the lie. Like, now, of course, I know that, oh no, it's that, I guess the film does treat it as, and I'm guessing the book treats as, no, indeed, the reality is that Blanche, faked this accident and gave, blamed it on Jane. But I was so in the moment, always thinking in terms, well, how are you going to try to, that was a last ditch attempt to try to kind of reach her. Or to try to get her to snap out of her childlike self, or what, her completely far gone self that she's at that point, was like, what if I convinced her that she wasn't actually that bad, that she didn't do this horrible thing, and, almost used her own sort of reality lying distortion right back at her.
Right.
So
that's a cool take. It's certainly, you could make that argument.
That was my first assumption when I was watching it, because I was so bought into the reality of, Blanche being, the victim of the accident.
Right. Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So it was weird. That worked for me in my very subjective way, but apparently isn't the movie. Ending so good. And then I didn't even realize she's ordering ice cream at the end and is so excited about it, just like she wanted so much at the beginning. Like, oh my God, full circle. Perfect.
Yep. One thing about how they filmed Elvira's death scene or murder scene, just the brilliance of where the camera is placed when they're in the hallway and Elvira has the hammer.
Mm-hmm.
She puts the hammer down on a little kind of like, I don't know what you would call it, but it's a little side table that's next to the door. and the camera is right there. So she basically puts the hammer into the lower left corner of the frame. And because it's a wide lens, the hammer looks humongous, right? Like it's distortedly big. And the two of them are kind of upper right, of frame. And you watch Blanche Jane, you watch Jane kind of stalk back around Elvira, and the hammer's looming right there, and Elvira gets in the door and like goes forward. It's just so good.
Well, even just as cool how it how we felt the power in Elvira standing there at the top of the stairs by how it's shot. We're so like we get in that moment how Jane actually feels like she did almost meet her foil a bit of someone who's not willing to put up with her BS, just in the way that was shot with her just sort of standing strong at the top of the stairs looking down at Jane. It was very good.
Yeah. And just some other sort of film technique things. The zoom ins on objects I really love, like the phone. There's a couple of them on the phone. There's a couple that are zoom in on Blanche's face. That top-down shot of her in the wheelchair is so good. I love that, but right prior to that moment, we go from the shot where the camera is essentially on the desk that she's having the dinner on, to when she shoves it off the desk, the camera pedestals down to underneath that desk, and we see her start to roll around. And it's just, there's just little nuanced things like that are so beautiful and well constructed. Both times, anytime we're at the bottom of the stairs or the top of the stairs, those shots are framed really, really well and lit really beautifully. Watching Blanche contemplate trying to get down the stairs the first time, having her small in frame at the top of the stairs and having the stairs effectively get bigger so from the top of the frame where Blanche is small, the stairs are small underneath her. But as we go down the stairs closer to us, the stairs get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Because they're closer to us and where the camera is set. All these little things really, really specifically heighten every component to the state of mind we're supposed to be in. The lighting stuff that we talked about, with Jane stepping into light or out of light. It's just so beautiful to look at. Mm-hmm. And it's, most of this movie is one location, like we're in the house most of the time.
Right. Didn't mention the element of the buzzer was so good. Not much to say about that, just aside from how good that was.
Yeah.
And then just a little even more on just the ending, but even more so just the whole third act, or however you want to break it down. Like, it's so natural to want to be rooting for Blanche and just thinking only in terms of how is she going to escape? What's her plan? And, there's that bit where she's sort of untying herself a little bit. But there's something really good about just sort of making all that just seem like an impossibility at a certain point. It didn't make too much of that thing, or didn't necessarily go that route, which was sort of the more typical thing. So again, just building this unexpected ending, it did that in different ways, and all great.
Yeah, it's really good. That scene when what's his name, the pianist?
Edwin.
Edwin. When he's left alone in the kitchen momentarily with the doll.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. It's so weird and freaky.
I also loved his moment where it's like, they're trying to keep cordial with each other when they first meet each other, and they each have their game. And she's like, "Oh, I always think it's great to break bread with strangers, don't you think?" And so she gives him those mini, sandwiches, just like a little, and he's just going to town on them. It's like he's stress eating these little bite-sized sandwiches right in front of her. It's so perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And the setting, I guess the last thing for me is just the setting, like the set decoration of the house. The house itself, which is still around, could put it on our list of things to go drive.
I know.
past.
I was, of course, already thinking that. Yeah.
The neighbors having that element of like they're not really nosy neighbors, but kind of. They're just sort of like, hey, can we insert
No,
ourselves
it's that
a little bit?
They aren't nosy at all. It's just that they're any kind of normal friendliness or cordialness or neighborliness is only seen by a sort of an invasion by Jane, or sort of like something, that's there, that she has just one more little thing that she has to work or lie around.
Right.
Which it's so good. She's getting confronted with just sort of just everyday small talk truths of just people being normal. And even that is like a foil to her.
Yeah, it makes me think. The other day I was driving around and I was saying to Britt that we drove past the house that is, some people think that the doctor, I forget the guy's name, and I forget the name of the house, but the doctor who is one of the suspects in the Black Dahlia case lived in a house right down the street from me. It's the Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. house. It's been in different movies and such. I think it's in, I don't know, it's been in a bunch of stuff. Anyway, we drove by and I was like, just think about the fact that it's plausible that there were a bunch of women murdered in that house right there that we drive by all the time. And we started talking sort of about that idea of like, actually, that's kind of true for any of the houses we drive by all the time, right? Like, we don't know the crazy, dark stuff that has occurred in any given house around anywhere, right? I think that idea of it could be happening in your neighbor's house is part of the horror of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that, because those neighbors, they're so unwitting about what's going on over there.
Yeah. It's like, the Burbs, but from the Burbs' point of view, or from the Klopek's point of view.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Even though we get that great scene at the end of the Burbs, we're the crazy ones. Don't you get it? We're the ones. Tom Hanks. It's this moment.
I love the Burbs.
Me too. Hey, maybe a future episode. Anyway, I mean, man, this just like any of our great films, it could go on, but I feel like I said everything I really want to say.
Agreed.
All right. Well, if there was anything, let's move on to our next section. Lo and behold, what did not work?
It's not ready yet.
Seems to work okay.
No, something important's missing.
What did not work?
I only really have one thing. I just wish the music wasn't so melodramatic.
It's funny. That was my only like maybe thing I had too. And it wasn't so much the music itself being melodramatic. It was just how much there was at all is what kind of made it that. But then at a certain time, I don't know. I got used to it. I see the year that it is. But there was like, God, what scene was it in particular? I think it might have been a scene with Edwin that was sort of tense, but where I'm just like, oh, this would be better if the music wasn't here. But that's just could be just a modern sensibilities thing so much, but then I wrapped around again and being like, well, now that I love this movie, I'm just going to love everything about it. And that includes kind of its whatever that factor is of just kind of going full that direction, it just becomes its character.
It just makes me, it's one of those things where like most of the time it's not really bothering me so much, but there are these moments when I'm like, whoa, the music really kind of just hits you in the face. And it is this, it's a very stylized, older style thing, which I get, right? Like it almost works in and of itself because it's like the style of the movies that they have been in previously. Right, exactly. So in a way, I totally get it. But I just couldn't help but think, imagine how much more upsetting and creepy this movie would be with a really haunting score underneath it.
I mean, for me, it was just less of it in a way. But again, that could just be first time viewings, not knowing exactly what I'm getting into, and then on the subsequent viewings, it's all good and gravy. That's
outside of that, I mean, honestly, like, what is there to like take issue with? I just
right. Well, actually, I can tie a little bit that into things of note if you're ready for that now.
sure.
All right, great. Here we go. Things of note.
Things of note.
This should be interesting.
Like, yeah, that was really interesting, actually, how you point out that the music itself is kind of more emblematic of the movies that they were in as characters in the movies. But, and I also look at it as there's something I really like about this little era of filmmaking from like the films that we've watched. And it's probably not just in horror too, and it's an area of history that's always fascinated me too. That's transitioning from what we think of as the stereotypical 1950s to what we think of as the stereotypical 1960s, right? Where you have these feet in two pools, two ponds kind of thing, and how filmically is that being balanced and explored? You know, whether it be Psycho is doing it just with being, you know, sort of typical 1950s feel, set up black and white, but then super 1960s transgressive, you know, mid-act kill the protagonist, like, or some of our other favorite ones, or, you know, noteworthy ones too from this era were Carnival of Souls, you know, which could be looked at just from the independent filmmaking spirit. From a few years later, just 1964 was 2000 Maniacs, and that whole time was when Herschel Gordon Lewis was doing his whole thing. We forget that just because it's so gory that it was actually that long ago. You know, his films were early 60s. Eyes Without a Face was 1960, another super transgressive, taking those 60s values with it. So even, you know, when we just saw that in the trailer too, thought that was super interesting of like trying to hold the audience's hands into this, I don't know, just exploring new territory. It's so neat. Similar, you know, the end scene of Psycho, the exposition scene, all that stuff. It's really cool.
It is cool. It's a weird era.
I love it so much.
Yeah. Me too.
Because I love both eras so much, you know, so I'm especially fascinated by the sort of blending and contrasting and headbutting of the two.
Yeah, I mean, The Innocents was right around then.
Yeah.
Black Sabbath was right around then.
Right, where you get these sort of a certain artistry in the filmmaking bumping up against these more like traditional approaches to it.
Was right then. Yeah, it's wild. It's kind of, you know, we've seen a lot from the 60 to 65 range.
Yeah.
Glidon was 65.
Oh my God. Again, like all ones I really loved and are just something about them too that only now I'm kind of recognizing this movie.
That's cool.
And this movie's, you know, just doing it so much in its meta ways of the old actors from the previous time, yada, yada.
Right. Oh my God, we forgot to mention, but I guess it can go here in terms of the old actors stuff. Using old footage from movies when the two actresses were young in the early stuff was so brilliant.
Right. It's like it's like how they had to play these roles, how they were born for these parts, you know.
It's great.
Yeah, it was super cool. Not just in a what works way, but just that was possible way, and that's how it played out way.
Yeah.
You're curious about the makeup. Apparently, Bette Davis created her own makeup for the role of Baby Jane, which was very just perfect and on par with the kind of person she is. Just going for it, going full force for it. I had heard this term before, but apparently there's this, you know, according to Wikipedia, this spawned the, quote, psycho biddy subgenre.
I read that. I'm like, what does that even mean?
It means it combines elements of horror, thriller, and women's film genres, which conventionally feature a formerly glamorous older woman who has become mentally unbalanced and terrorizes those around her.
So Sunset Boulevard, would that
that
fit
was
into that?
1950. That totally fits in that, but that was 1950, and apparently, like, this is the one that actually started a trend of these films in sort of the next 10 years. I've been kind of off and on watching the first season of Twilight Zone. There's a great episode that falls under that, if you know the one I'm talking about, similar aging starlet who's like watching her old film reels over and over, and it's really good episode. Yeah, Tim, another one that we should do a little locations visit tour of, see the house. I'd love to do that. But what was so funny was when I was looking it up, that a super recent article came up on it from...
Oh, really?
Yeah, just from 13 days ago by when we're recording this, that for the first time in, God, how many years is it? It's gone up for sale. Oh, yeah, for the first time in 48 years, the property is up for sale.
Wow.
So... If any friends and fans listening to this have a $3.795 million, they want to, buy this house for us.
Yeah, that can be our new studio.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have to record at the house from whatever happened to be Baby Jane, whatever. Be perfect.
Yep. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. What else do you got here?
Just it's interesting to me how this sort of critically was very mixed at the time, but really grew into this, fan favorite, cult favorite, if you will. For a quote unquote horror film, Bette Davis getting an Oscar nomination is pretty sweet. They won a bunch of awards elsewhere. Let's see. The only one that they won as an Academy Award was for costume design.
Yeah.
Nominated for a bunch of stuff though. Yeah, I just think it's so cool, like the era, the house itself.
Which still looks on that, it's, the interior was a set, but the outside, it looks just like it still, just like down to the numbers of the address itself, just all the little window fixtures. It's kind of incredible.
I've always found it kind of interesting and fascinating, the lore around these two actresses and their relationship. I think what's interesting is not the truth about it, is that how the tabloids and people just love to dive into the possibility of what their relationship was like.
Right. It's become something outside of themselves now. It's just the idea of it has taken on a grandeur, a legend that's just aside the point of what may have actually happened.
Because our sense, or at least my sense of these two actresses, is really based off of only what other people say about them, right? It's we weren't alive when they were doing their thing. So, when you think of Joan Crawford, or the first thing that generally comes to mind is the sort of mommy dearest portrayal of her, which is that she was this larger than life maniac, and tortured her daughter in a lot of ways, which spawned a book, which spawned a movie with Jessica Lange, and Bette Davis is just sort of, to me, is just notorious as a figure in Hollywood history. But I don't really know anything about their actual lives.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's this weird thing. That's why I say it's almost like what other people's sort of perception of them is what we get. It's not really, I don't know how much of their real life stuff is known. In particular, we don't even know how old Joan Crawford is because she's got a question mark next to her date of birth. Little things like that then just make me go, oh, right. They both come from that era of filmmaking, the golden age of film, right? Old Hollywood, the old MGM, craziness and all that stuff. It's so fascinating to me. It makes me think of that podcast again.
You Must Remember
You
This.
Must Remember This. Yeah. And like there's a whole season on, well, there's a season on like the blondes of old Hollywood. And then there's a MGM season. And then there's a Blacklist season. Like, it's pretty cool.
Cool.
That's it though. That's all.
Great. Well, I think that's all I have too. So
cool.
Tim, I think that means we got to recommend Ed something.
We do. What do you got?
Well, a friend recommended it to me. It was one of those a friend recommends to you a couple years ago, and you finally get around to watching it. And I've really been wanting to watch it, but I watched Personal Shopper with Kristen Stewart from 2016. I almost want to like recommend it to you directly too, Tim. It is so cool. There's a lot of neat stuff with, well, you know what? I was so blind going into it. I don't want to say why I want to recommend it necessarily, but even alone, what sold me, it's got something to do with Kristen Stewart playing a personal shopper to like a rich woman or model in kind of like largely Paris set, all that good stuff.
Okay.
So, but then there's a whole lot more to it that I think is just better left to when you see it.
Oh, cool.
So,
now I'm intrigued.
Yes. I was really into it. Personal Shopper.
Wow. Cool. I just watched a Netflix movie that was surprisingly good. Art direction in it is incredible. It's called His House. It's from 2020. And it is, man, what should I tell you about it? It's about a refugee couple from Sudan moving to England. Well, or whatever, fleeing to England, whatever. They get on a boat and they end up in England somewhere. And the house that they are given to, which is just like the projects, it's like super crap rundown, not a nice place, but the one that they're given, it has some insidious stuff to it, malevolence.
I've heard about it. His
It's
House.
very good, and the performances are really great. I recognize the lead woman from Lovecraft Country. Her name is Wunmi Mosaku, excuse me. And man, they're good. There's some dreamy sort of art deck stuff, like crazy film stuff it's so cool. So definitely get into it. Well worth it.
Great. Well, Tim, I want to see what we're going to get into next week. So you want to pull a movie for us?
I can do that for us. That's the sound of the hat. Here we go. This one right here. It is, The Sentinel from 1977.
Awesome.
I don't know anything about this.
You haven't seen it? I'm trying to
Nope.
think if this is one that I've seen.
The Sentinel. Huh.
No, I always like when I hear this title.
Got, Burgess Meredith.
When I hear this title, I always think it's that George C. Scott like haunted house movie. What is that one called?
Oh, that's The Changeling.
Okay. Do we have that on our hat? That's why I think maybe.
I think we do. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we do.
Cool. Well, The Sentinel, I do not think I've seen.
I definitely have not. It looks very 70s.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Oh man, it's got a bunch of people in it.
Great.
Eli Wallach, Christopher Walken, Ava Gardner. Jesus.
Need no say more.
Holy crap. Cool.
Well,
good times.
Well. Great. I'm glad we get to stay. You know, I like unfurling and uncovering these older films. So until then, next week you can find us wherever you found us, including at dismemberinghorde.com. We got an Instagram. We got a Twitter. Got all that jazz. Anything to add to that, Tim?
all that jazz.
Just that.
That's it.
Great. Well, no. And thanks again, Ramsey, for the submission. Definitely one of the better ones that people have submitted. It's great.
Yeah. Classic.
Indeed. I see why it's classic, lived up to its classic status. So, in closing, thank you so much for being here. And remember, you're not getting your breakfast because you didn't eat your din-din.
We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.